Breaking. The British government just effectively collapsed on live television, and the scenes coming out of Westminster are unlike anything witnessed in 300 years of parliamentary history. Keir Starmer sat motionless, his face drained of all color, as the House of Commons descended into absolute anarchy around him. Senior cabinet ministers were seen openly weeping, backbenchers were screaming across the aisle, and the Speaker of the House lost total control of the chamber. If you want to understand how a routine Wednesday afternoon turned into the end of a political era, you need to hit that subscribe button right now, because the mainstream media is already trying to sanitize what just happened. Here is the minute-by-minute breakdown of the moment British democracy hit the wall. At exactly 12:03 p.m. today, during the height of Prime Minister's questions, the atmosphere in the chamber shifted violently. Starmer was at the dispatch box, defending his latest controversial budget cuts, when the heavy oak doors of the chamber swung open with a force that echoed through the room. It wasn't the Black Rod. It wasn't a messenger. It was King Charles III himself, flanked not by ceremonial guards, but by his personal legal counsel. The protocol breach was so severe, so shatteringly unprecedented, that the entire room fell into a terrified silence. The king walked to the center of the floor, ignoring the speaker's chair entirely. He wasn't wearing the trappings of monarchy. There was no crown, no robe, just a somber gray suit that signaled this was not a ceremony. It was an intervention. Starmer tried to speak, perhaps to offer a formal greeting, but the king held up a single hand, silencing the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom like a scolded schoolboy. "Sit down, Mr. Starmer," the king said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "The time for pleasantries has passed."
What followed was the most brutal verbal dismantling of a sitting government ever recorded. The king didn't use vague diplomatic language. He didn't speak in riddles. He went straight for the throat. "I have sat on the throne and watched you treat the people of this nation with a disdain that borders on malice," Charles declared, staring directly into the cameras. "You have asked the British public to tighten their belts, to freeze in their homes, and to sacrifice their dignity, while you sign away their sovereignty to global interests." The shock in the room was physical. You could see the blood drain from the faces of the front bench. Angela Rayner looked down at her feet. Rachel Reeves gripped her papers until her knuckles turned white. But the king was just getting started. He turned to the packed public gallery and pointed a shaking finger at the government benches. "Yesterday, you passed the Public Assets Seizure Clause," he boomed. "A bill you claimed was for economic stability. My advisors tell me it is nothing less than legalized theft from the working families of this country."
This is where the broadcast feeds usually cut away, but they didn't. The operators were too stunned to react. The king reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of papers. "I hold here the testimony of Mrs. Edna Clay, an 82-year-old widow from Sunderland," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Her husband worked in the shipyards for 40 years. She survives on a state pension that you have just voted to tax in real terms. She wrote to me saying she is eating pet food to keep the heating on." A gasp went through the chamber, audible even over the broadcast microphones. "Is this your vision of Britain?" the king shouted, slamming the papers onto the dispatch box right in front of Starmer. "Is this the justice you promised? Because from where I stand, it looks like a crime." The silence that followed lasted for 6 agonizing seconds. Starmer opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was paralyzed. And then the unthinkable happened. Wes Streeting, the health secretary, stood up, looked at the prime minister, looked at the king, and walked out of the chamber. He didn't bow. He didn't ask permission. He just left. That was the signal. But then the floodgates opened. It wasn't just Streeting. Within moments, 2 more junior ministers followed him, effectively resigning from the government live on air. The message was clear. The ship is sinking, and nobody wants to be on board when it goes under. But what makes this crisis truly terminal isn't the walkout. It's the revelation that came next. The king didn't just bring letters from widows. He brought receipts. "While Mrs. Clay freezes," Charles continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "I have seen the Treasury reports you tried to bury. He held up a redacted document. "You are spending $6.4 million a day on consultancy fees for projects that don't exist, while telling veterans they must wait 2 years for mental health support." This was the kill shot. The juxtaposition of government waste against the suffering of the nation's most vulnerable citizens shattered whatever moral authority Labour had left. The chamber erupted into chaos, with opposition MPs jeering and Labour MPs looking around in panic, realizing their careers might have just ended in the span of 5 minutes. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Within 20 minutes of the king leaving the chamber, the British pound plummeted on the international markets, hitting a 3-year low against the dollar. Traders weren't reacting to economic data. They were reacting to the total collapse of political stability in the UK. But while the City of London panicked, the streets of Britain exploded with a very different energy. Social media platforms lit up with millions of shares of the King's speech. The hashtag #TheKingSpeaks trended globally within the hour, amassing 4.5 million interactions. But it wasn't just internet noise. It was raw, visceral anger. People felt seen for the first time in years. They felt that finally someone with power was speaking the truth about the betrayal they live with every single day.
And here is where the story gets darker for Starmer. As the king's motorcade departed Westminster, the stories of the people he mentioned began to surface, proving that the palace had done its homework. Journalists tracked down Edna Clay within an hour. She was standing outside her terraced house in Sunderland, wrapped in a blanket, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't think he'd read it," she told a reporter from Sky News. "I wrote it in desperation. I didn't think anyone in London cared if I lived or died." That clip has now been viewed 12 million times. The comments section is a graveyard of Labour's electoral prospects. Thousands of users are sharing their own stories of neglect. Cancer treatments canceled, heating bills unpaid, businesses closed, while watching a government that seems more interested in international posturing than domestic survival. The narrative has shifted permanently. It is no longer left versus right. It is the people versus the parasites. And the king just handed the people a sledgehammer. Meanwhile, the contrast between the government's treatment of citizens like Edna and their other spending priorities is fueling a rage that is terrifying Westminster insiders. Leaked memos from the Home Office, surfacing just hours after the speech, show that while pensioners are being means-tested for winter fuel payments, the budget for social cohesion initiatives, a vague bureaucratic term for PR campaigns, has ballooned by 200%. We are talking about millions of pounds funneled into think tanks and committees, while legitimate war heroes are sleeping in hostels. Captain James Miller, a retired paratrooper who served in the Falklands, posted a video response that is currently sweeping across Facebook. Sitting in a cold, damp bedsit, surrounded by his medals, he held up his eviction notice. "The king is right," Miller said, his voice shaking with suppressed fury. "I fought for this country. I bled for it. And now I'm being told there's no money to house me, while I watch brand new developments being ring-fenced for people who arrived yesterday. It's a betrayal." This sentiment is tearing through the traditional Labour heartlands like a wildfire. In places like Bolton, Stoke, and Doncaster, the mood is mutinous. These are constituencies that lent their votes to Starmer on the promise of change, and they feel they have been sold a lie. The king's intervention didn't create this anger, it validated it. It gave permission for ordinary people to say enough. And the terrifying reality for Downing Street is that they have no response. How do you spin a 90-year-old war widow eating cat food? How do you explain away the moral judgment of the head of state? You can't. Starmer is currently locked in number 10 with his closest aides, and sources say the mood is funereal. They know the spell is broken. The illusion of competence is gone. They aren't governing anymore. They are occupying office, and the landlord just served them an eviction notice.
But the most dangerous development for the establishment isn't the public anger. It's who is stepping in to channel it. While Starmer hides and the Tories squabble over who is to blame, But the most dangerous development for the establishment isn't the public anger.
It's who is stepping in to channel it. While Starmer hides and the Tories squabble over who is to blame, Nigel Farage has moved with the speed and precision of a political predator. Less than 2 hours after the King's speech, Farage was on stage in Hartlepool, standing before a backdrop of Union Jacks that seemed to stretch for miles. The crowd was already in the thousands, mobilized by the instant virality of the crisis. Farage didn't look like a politician on the campaign trail. He looked like a leader in waiting. The King has done what no prime minister has had the guts to do, Farage roared, the crowd hanging on his every word. He has called out the rot at the heart of Westminster. He has confirmed what Reform UK has been saying for years. They despise you. They despise your history. They despise your flag. And they despise your rights. The crowd's response was deafening. It wasn't polite applause. It was a primal roar of agreement. Farage is capitalizing on this moment to position himself as the true defender of the crown and the Constitution. He is framing the upcoming struggle not as an election, but as a rescue mission. Starmer is not just incompetent, Farage declared, pointing towards London. He is illegitimate. He has lost the confidence of the King, and he has lost the confidence of the country. He must go, and he must go tonight. The polling numbers backing this up are astronomical. An emergency snap poll conducted by YouGov this afternoon puts Reform UK at 32%, overtaking the Conservatives and breathing down Labour's neck within the margin of error. In the best Prime Minister metric, Farage has surged 10 points in a single afternoon. This is a political earthquake. The tectonic plates of British politics are shifting, and the two-party system is falling into the crevice.
And here is what makes it worse for the establishment. Farage isn't just giving speeches, he's building a coalition. Reports are coming in that dissatisfied Conservative MPs are engaging in back-channel talks with Reform leadership. We are potentially looking at a mass defection that could bring down the government from within. The frantic calls going out from Conservative HQ are going unanswered. The panic is total. They realize that by staying silent while the King spoke for the people, they have made themselves irrelevant. Farage has seized the moral high ground, wrapping himself in the flag and the monarchy, effectively stealing the Conservative Party's entire identity in one afternoon. The establishment media is trying to paint this as populism run amok, but the viewers aren't buying it. The comments on BBC and Sky News YouTube channels are almost unanimously pro-King and pro-Farage. The narrative control is gone. The gatekeepers have lost the keys. This is the nightmare scenario for the globalist faction in Westminster. They rely on apathy. They rely on the public thinking that they are all the same. But today, the King proved that things can be different, and Farage is promising that things will be different. The energy in Hartlepool was electric, reminiscent of the early Brexit rallies, but with a harder, sharper edge. People aren't just wanting to leave the EU anymore. They want to dismantle the entire Westminster bubble. They want accountability for the wasted millions, for the broken promises, and for the disrespect shown to people like Edna Clay and Captain Miller. Farage is the only one offering them a weapon to fight back with, and that weapon is the ballot box. If an election were held tomorrow, the political map of Britain would be unrecognizable.
So where do we go from here? The next 48 hours are the most critical in British history since 1940. We are in uncharted waters. The Constitution is unwritten, relying on norms and conventions that Starmer has trampled and the King has now exploded. Can a prime minister survive when the monarch has effectively declared him an enemy of the people? Constitutionally, perhaps. Morally, absolutely not. The pressure on Starmer to resign is becoming unbearable. It's not just the opposition. His own backbenchers are terrified for their seats. They know that every day Starmer stays in power, Reform UK grows stronger. They are watching their majorities evaporate in real time. The whispers of a leadership challenge are turning into shouts. But Starmer is stubborn. He is a man of the system, and the system protects its own. There are already rumors that the government is planning a counterattack, potentially using the Supreme Court to argue that the King's intervention was unconstitutional. Imagine that. A Labour government dragging the King through the courts for daring to speak up for the poor.
It would be suicide, but desperate men do desperate things. The markets are watching, the world is watching, and most importantly, the British people are watching. The veil has been lifted. We have seen the contempt they hold us in, and we have seen the fear in their eyes when they are challenged. We are staring at the potential dissolution of Parliament. If the King refuses royal assent to the upcoming finance bills, the government cannot function. The machinery of state will grind to a halt. We could be looking at a general election before Christmas, an election that would be fought not on taxes or NHS waiting lists, but on the fundamental question of who owns Britain, the technocrats in Westminster or the people they are supposed to serve. The stakes could not be higher. If he survives, the monarchy is neutered forever. If he falls, we enter a new age of populism that could sweep away the old order entirely.
This is not just a news story. This is history being written in blood and ink. The old rules are dead. The establishment. This is not just a news story. This is history being written in blood and ink. The old rules are dead. The establishment is trembling. And out of the chaos, new forces are rising. Will Nigel Farage end up in number 10? Will the King force a constitutional rewrite? Or will Starmer drag the country down with him in a final act of ego? The only certainty is that Britain will never be the same again. The storm has broken, and we are all standing in the rain, waiting to see what is left standing when the clouds clear.